The Naruto and Boruto stories have long presented ideas on humanity. As a species, as a society, where have we succeeded? Where have we failed? What makes us strong? What makes us waver? What makes us human? To address these questions, the Boruto story has largely devoted its attention to a new cast of characters who, despite possessing noticeable human traits, are distinctly not human in origin. Rather, they are an alien species known as the Shinju. In doing so, much like a controlled experiment in science, something characters like Orochimaru and Amado would point out, the story is able to separate what makes us human on a genetic or instinctual level from what makes us human on a deeper, more philosophical level. This is a simple approach that any fan of Hunter x Hunter is all too familiar with, and one that's distinctly different from that of Naruto, which primarily focuses on human characters who have forsaken or abandoned their humanity, rather than alien characters who are developing their humanity. As such, despite reaching near identical conclusions to similar themes regarding love and humanity, the Naruto and Boruto stories are able to present those ideas in unique ways, and in fact, the stories themselves almost serve as perfect foils to each other in this regard, highlighting each other's differences when compared side to side in order to paint a grander picture. Kawaki himself serves this function in many ways, following a more Naruto-like character arc as a human rejecting his humanity, thus operating as a foil to Boruto and the Shinju. As I mentioned, the Boruto story aims to separate what makes us human on a genetic or instinctual level from what makes us human on a deeper, more philosophical level. One such way that Jura, the leader of the Shinju, has continuously pointed out is our ability to surpass our instincts, something most other species would never, or at least rarely ever, do. Jura's theory is that love is one of the primary causes of this phenomenon, and as such, is something for the Shinju to be wary of, for he believes that all life forms should obey their instincts to strive towards evolution. However, contrary to popular belief, love, in of itself, is not a theme. It is merely a concept. It's what the story says about love and humanity that holds meaning. Is love humanity's greatest strength? Is it humanity's greatest weakness? Or is it both? How important is love to humans? In what ways can love benefit us? In what ways can love hurt us? What is love? How can we, as a species, better understand love in order to better understand ourselves and those around us? It is when the story begs these types of questions that we are able to find the intended theme. In this case, the Shinju directly question what love is, and Jura directly proposes his own theories while continuing to search for a definitive answer. Meanwhile, we observe the effect love has on characters such as Eida, Sarada, Sumire, Konohamaru, Matsuri, Yodo, and so on to find the Boruto story's answers to these questions. The same applies to human reasoning, another flaw of humanity that Jura discusses. By grasping this concept and viewing the story from this lens, we are better able to predict what direction these character arcs may take, and even if the story takes some unexpected twists and turns, this analysis will better help us understand the story's messages and why they're so important. Having set this foundation, let's examine what the story seems to be saying about love and human reasoning with its various characters. Specifically, I want to focus on the Shinju and the deeper meaning behind each of their targets. Something this arc has repeatedly shoved in our faces is the irrational side of love. Sumire scolded Sarada for disregarding Sumire's love for Boruto and only viewing things from her quote-unquote selfish perspective. Sarada is spending half this sand mission thinking about Boruto and Sumire's words instead of the sand mission itself. Yodo was way too emotional on this mission, causing her to show clear signs of animosity towards Ryu and to easily fall for his Thorn Soul trap. And most notably, Matsuri and Konohamaru frantically arguing over what to call Konohamaru because neither side was willing to compromise and be open-minded towards the other's feelings. More on that later. All of these examples portray love in a negative, irrational light, lending credence to Jura's words in chapter 19, which is juxtaposed with Matsuri and Konohamaru's argument. So what does Jura actually say? Jura says that he believes all life forms should obey their instincts to strive towards the goal known as evolution, and that humans bind themselves with restraints called reasoning, which dull their instincts. It's a harmful side effect of acquiring intelligence, and it's why humankind carries a fatal flaw, unlike us divine trees who stay true to our instincts. Now, if you've watched literally any video where I talk about Jura, especially my recent video about Jura's obsession with reading, which serves as a preliminary analysis on his character, then you know Jura has broken this rule several times. He's a hypocrite. Jura has absolutely disobeyed his instincts and gone so far as to let his own reasoning justify that disobedience. Why hasn't he devoured Boruto or Kawaki and evolved into a proper divine tree yet? To satisfy his thirst for knowledge and urge for identity. Why did Jura talk to and observe Team 10? Because he was curious and wanted to learn more about humanity. Why did Jura let Boruto take Himawari away? Because he became more curious and interested in Boruto than devouring his target. Why does Jura want to kill Boruto when his instinct is to devour him? Because his reasoning dictates that Boruto is too dangerous to be left alive. Why did Jura let Ko take care of Boruto and the accomplice instead of doing it himself? So he could observe where Ko's destiny leads him. Why is Jura still reading books instead of devouring his target or literally anything else? To satisfy his curiosity and thirst for knowledge. Every step of the way, Jura defies his instincts under the excuse of his own reasoning, the thing he claims is the source of humanity's flaw and why they disobey their instincts. The Ten-Tails who operates purely on instinct would not make any of these decisions. These are decisions only Jura with his growing humanity could make. However, Jura is seemingly blind to his hypocrisy, and I think that's great. His contradiction facilitates the story's themes in an engaging way that contrasts with other characters. So what does all this mean for Jura's character moving forward? As we've witnessed, Jura is reluctant to commit to any action himself. He is an observer just like us. As such, we can expect Jura to remain an observer, soaking in whatever knowledge he can by observing Code and his fellow Shinju, at least for the time being. This is actually the crux of Koji's plan. It's entirely reliant on Jura not doing anything, because according to Koji, the moment Jura gets truly serious, it's all over for everyone. So all of Koji's precautions are merely to ensure that Jura remains an observer. This doesn't mean that Jura will never do anything besides talk and read books. Eventually, he will take action, but only eventually. He needs something to give him confidence as he walks his path towards evolution, something to keep him from hesitating. More than likely, that something could be another Shinju devouring their target and walking that path ahead of him, which brings us to Matsuri. Juxtaposed with Jura's discussion of love and the danger it could pose to the Shinju was Matsuri having a meltdown because of that very same concept. Her love for Konohamaru was driving her insane, leading her to behave irrationally, a recurring theme in this arc. Matsuri's immediate, instinctual solution to this problem is to simply devour Konohamaru so that she will never have to feel this way again, and Jura echoes this line of thinking by stating, "I'm sure you hear it too. Our instincts screaming and warning that we must understand this dangerous concept, love, and overcome it." How did the Shinju plan to overcome love? By devouring their targets. For now, anyway. Interestingly, Jura echoes the beliefs of the old shinobi system, most notably portrayed through Zabuza, the Blood Mist Village, and Danzo's Foundation. Under this principle, a shinobi was most effective once they killed their heart, thereby eliminating humanity's greatest flaw. In doing so, they transform from human to tool, the idealized version of a shinobi. Similarly, Sasuke sought strength through the severing of his bonds in the Sasuke retrieval arc. By severing those bonds, Sasuke could subject himself to even greater pain and solitude, allowing him to ascend to new heights. Likewise, Jura believes that this flaw, love, gives rise to problems in sentient life forms, and as such, is something to fear and overcome. Given Matsuri's current situation with Konohamaru, we are in a position to witness Matsuri accomplish this exact feat, and more than likely, this will provide some benefit to Matsuri as a Shinju, the same way the shinobi system found benefit from killing one's heart. However, while these mindsets hold elements of truth, they ignore the other side of the equation, when this flaw gives rise to humanity's greatest strength. As famously stated by Haku, when a person has something important to protect, that's when they can become truly stronger. This feeling, the feeling of having something precious that you want to protect, is born out of love. It's born out of emotion. There's no logic or reason behind it. It's something you just have, for no reason other than that you are human. It is a strength that stems from one's humanity. Through this message, we are shown that the world's view of a shinobi does not create the strongest shinobi, for it is only when you are protecting something precious to you that you become your strongest. As such, despite the benefit that comes from overcoming love, the Shinju will inevitably find that this answer falls short, that love is not something to fear or overcome, but something to embrace. For this reason, each Shinju will likely find a different answer in regards to love as they face different obstacles, and as a result, overcoming love and devouring a target will likely hold different meaning to each individual Shinju, and we've already seen evidence of this process. In chapter 20, Matsuri explains to Konohamaru, "My defensive instincts tell me to eliminate the danger. Conversely, there's the part of me that desires you. As they mix together, I feel compelled to devour you." Essentially, by devouring Konohamaru, she more or less achieves both goals. On one hand, she eliminates Konohamaru, the subject of her irrational love, while on the other hand, she quote-unquote obtains Konohamaru, whom she desires by absorbing him into herself. However, while Matsuri's thought process makes perfect sense, it is very specific to Matsuri in particular. Initially, we were led to believe that the Shinju likely each had some sort of emotional connection or feeling towards their target stemming from their original human source, which, when coupled with their instinctual desire to devour others, led to the desire to devour their target. However, Matsuri's recent dialogue indicates a new perspective, one that hinges on Matsuri's romantic love for Konohamaru. In her case, she instinctually fears Konohamaru as a threat due to the unknown, irrational feeling he sparks within her, while simultaneously desiring him as a romantic partner. However, this isn't how she initially felt when she first decided to make Konohamaru her target. Matsuri never knew how Konohamaru made her feel until she actually met and talked to him. There wasn't a part of her that desired him romantically yet, and she certainly didn't instinctually fear him as a dangerous threat yet. What this illustrates is that devouring Konohamaru now holds a different significance to Matsuri. What was initially an instinctual desire to devour, paired with a slight inclination towards a particular person, has now developed into a strong emotional desire towards that person and a strong instinctual desire to eliminate that person, which Matsuri has used to justify her decision to devour Konohamaru. However, this isn't necessarily the case for all other Shinju. Jura and Hidari most definitely don't share these same sentiments towards their respective targets, whom they've also met and spoken to directly, and in fact, they've actually displayed the opposite. Hidari is solely focused on answering an introspective question about his identity, something Matsuri and Mamushi and Ryu have never shown any interest in. And thanks to Jura's suggestion in chapter 5, Hidari has been led to believe that devouring his target will provide some insight towards finding his identity, if not answering the question outright. Similarly, Jura is of the belief that they should follow their instincts to strive towards evolution, and since their desire to devour is instinctual, this indicates that Jura believes that devouring their targets will help the Shinju evolve, even if he consistently finds excuses to not go through with it himself. So while at face value, they might all have the same goal, their true purpose behind that goal is likely to develop into something different for each Shinju, and the same goes for the justifications of their paths, even if that path is seemingly the same. This doesn't mean that the concept of love can't trickle down to the other Shinju and their targets in any manner. It very well might. But Hidari's not going to develop romantic feelings for Sarada. That would just be weird. He hasn't even shown any signs of parental love for Sarada yet. However, While he's definitely got a long ways to go before this happens, there's a fairly reasonable chance that he may start to develop parental feelings or something similar for his target Sarada, either guiding him towards forming his new identity or in response to learning about his original human self of Sasuke. In this case, we would still apply the overarching concept of love to Hidari and Sarada, while staying true to Hidari's character and goals and clearly doing something distinct from that of Matsuri and Konohamaru. Not just in terms of romantic love versus familial love, but also in terms of why that Shinju chooses to or chooses not to devour their target. Coming back to Matsuri and Konohamaru for a moment, given that Konohamaru initially failed to calmly assess, understand, and react to Matsuri's point of view and view this information from the perspective of his mission due to a natural, irrational response stemming from his feelings towards Moegi, then was able to overcome this irrationality and turn the tides in his favor, only to ultimately falter as a result of his good-hearted nature and underlying feelings for Moegi, as Matsuri called him Konohamaru-chan, with tears in her eyes as Konohamaru was about to kill her. It seems most likely that Matsuri will ultimately devour Konohamaru, especially since Konohamaru's betrayal most definitely angered Matsuri even further, and quite frankly, her injuries don't really even affect her at all, since all she's ever done is use their Earth style and jacket bear thing to attack, neither of which require her physical body to use. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, at least one Shinju has to devour their target at some point in order for the story to present why that path is either right or wrong, and given that they faked us out of both targets being devoured in the previous arc, which was essentially just a setup arc for this current arc, we really should see either Konohamaru, Gaara, or both be devoured in this arc. If that is the case, Jura will be able to observe exactly what he needs to, propelling him forward towards whatever path he decides to take. This is especially important because Jura had a significant emotional reaction to the situation between Matsuri and Konohamaru. While it's easy to assume that Jura and Matsuri's emotions were simply linked, plenty of evidence suggests otherwise. To start, Jura himself literally stated that he could not feel Matsuri's emotions in Chapter 5, so it would be kinda weird for him to randomly do so now. Moreover, Jura has never once shared other feelings or bodily functions with the other Shinju previously, including Matsuri's intense rage in this very scene, every time the Shinju have felt pain from battle, or even when Ryu was seemingly coughing up blood in Chapter 19. Why would Jura's tear ducts be connected to Matsuri's, but not his blood flow to Ryu's? I think it should be an all or nothing type of deal. Moreover, Jura's commentary of the moment is presented from the perspective of the third party that he is, rather than from a first-person perspective as if he experienced the moment firsthand. For example, it's not as though he said, "I can feel it, Matsuri's heart-wrenching. Because of love, Matsuri wavered and blah blah blah." Instead, he just said, "Because of love, blah blah blah." A declarative type of statement, rather than a sentimental one. Pooling this information together, I believe this was Jura's genuine reaction to the situation and the danger that love poses to the Shinju and even to humanity as a whole. It causes predicaments like these. Slowly but surely, we're witnessing Jura display different emotions. His first display of minor excitement was towards Himawari when he wanted to test his true power. His first display of minor anger was towards Kawaki when he fought in front of the bookstore. And his first display of sadness and sorrow was towards the situation between Matsuri and Konohamaru. Jura himself is developing emotions, and he's intimately aware of the potential problems this can pose for him and the other Shinju. And so, if Matsuri devours Konohamaru and seemingly overcomes love as a result, this could motivate Jura and the other Shinju to pick up the pace on devouring their own targets. This is especially important for someone like Mamushi, who so far hasn't done anything but lie around at the hideout. Matsuri's success could be the reason he finally makes his move in the next arc. Of course, Boruto ripped Matsuri to shreds in this latest chapter, but given how worried Koji is about Boruto saving Konohamaru, if Jura can save Matsuri's life like he did Hidari's, it's entirely possible Matsuri will be able to devour Konohamaru, leading to new developments for Jura, Hidari, and Mamushi, where I believe these three characters will each travel a different path in response to Matsuri's development. I've already discussed Jura pretty extensively, so now let's take a closer look at Hidari. From the onset, Hidari has had the most clear and consistent goal among the Shinju. His first line of dialogue questioned his identity, and since then, all of his thoughts, words, and actions have worked to answer that question. This goal cannot be understated. Unlike the other Shinju, it is the driving force behind his every move. And when on the receiving end of this question, Hidari puts up a shield. He deflects the question, instead asking one of his own. But why?
Why?
Why do these questions bother Hidari so much?
Seriously? You asked why?
This defensive mechanism is an instinctual response to the fear of confronting oneself. These questions expose his uneasiness, his uncertainty. They expose the very thing he is most self-conscious about, his identity. Who are you? That's the question Hidari wants to answer most, yet it's the question he can answer least. Hidari doesn't know who he is. He doesn't know where he came from. He doesn't know how or why he came into existence, and he doesn't know how he does the things he does. He just can. It's ingrained into him. It's instinctual. He's a man operating on instinct trying to surpass his instincts. And in chapter 11, Hidari took an important step forward. He asked Sarada Uchiha, his target, who she is, but Sarada did not answer. This is incredibly important. Sarada's answer, or lack thereof, is essential to the validation or invalidation of Hidari's path. If Sarada has no answer, Hidari's approach is validated. He has no reason to doubt his path to finding his identity. But if Sarada has an answer, Hidari's approach is invalidated. He has a reason to falter, a reason to doubt his path, as Sarada has formed her identity without devouring anyone in order to do so. However, because Sarada did not answer Hidari's question, Hidari has received validation of his path. This does not mean, however, that Hidari can't and won't have further doubts about his path. Oftentimes with redeemable antagonists, they will have emotional doubts but logical validations. Deep down, their heart won't want to go through with their path, but their experiences and logic will tell them that they must go through with it. You've seen this with multiple characters in Naruto. Nagato is a perfect example. Nagato was someone who emotionally doubted his path, but found logical validation from the world and his experiences. And when Naruto challenged his path, he sought to validate his path by testing Naruto. Nagato first did this when the Diva Path pinned Naruto down and explained the cycle of hatred, his plan, and asked Naruto how he would confront this hatred in order to create peace, but Naruto had no answer. And by having no answer, Naruto validated Nagato's path, for even if it strayed from their emotional idealism, it was the only answer that had been presented. It was the only path to take. This completely crushed Naruto, causing him to emotionally waver and temporarily lose hope in himself. And by succumbing to his rage and unleashing the Nine Tails, Naruto only further validated Nagato's path. But after talking to Minato, who unconditionally believed in Naruto, Naruto's faith was restored, and he challenged Nagato once again. And upon receiving that challenge, Nagato sought to validate his path by testing Naruto yet again, because despite his continuous validations throughout the years, and even during this invasion, Nagato still had doubts. He still wanted a better answer. This was Nagato's humanity, his identity. So when Naruto finally invalidated Nagato's path by not choosing vengeance despite sharing the same pain as Nagato, Nagato's logic had crumbled. Moreover, by echoing the same words and ideology that Nagato once spoke to Jiraiya in the past, Naruto appealed to Nagato on an emotional level that cannot be understated. In doing so, Naruto overcame Nagato both logically and emotionally. Nagato's path had utterly crumbled. All that was left was Nagato's humanity, his identity. All of this is to say that if Hidari's path is validated by Sarada's failure to provide an answer, That does not mean all of his doubts have been erased, and it does not mean that Sarada can't challenge Hidari once again and provide an answer the second time around, just as it was with Naruto and Nagato. For just like Nagato, it is Hidari's humanity that forms these doubts. It is Hidari's humanity that fights against his instincts. His humanity doesn't want to devour. It doesn't want to be Ten Tails. It wants to be human. It wants identity. And based on Sarada's development in chapter 21, it is very likely that Sarada will challenge Hidari once again. But this time, she will have an answer to his question, once again pushing Hidari to confront himself and his path. As I mentioned, much of this internal conflict will be sparked by the possible outcome of Matsuri devouring Konohamaru. More than likely, Jura will continue to observe his fellow Shinju as they respond to this outcome. Hidari may find himself pulled in two directions, one that's propelled forward by Matsuri's success, and one that's pushed backwards by Sarada's success, and Mamushi will likely be the most driven forward. And speaking of Mamushi, he and Ryu are the only two Shinju we haven't really talked about yet. This is of course because we've barely gotten anything to work with for their characters and motivations, but I think there's enough there to at least start the conversation, especially in Mamushi's case. Given that Jura, Hidari, and Matsuri have all displayed different motivations for devouring their targets, I think it's reasonable to assume this will likely apply to Mamushi and Ryu as well. With that in mind, let's consider the minimal information we know about Bug and Mamushi. First, out of all the Shinju so far, Mamushi has shown the strongest desire to devour the otsutsuki, and shown the weakest desire to devour another target or answer a question about himself or humanity. He was trying the hardest to devour Boruto in chapter 4. He was the one to ask Jura why he wants to devour Naruto when he's not an otsutsuki in chapter 5. And he's only shown a disinterest in Jura's analysis of humans, whereas people like Hidari have been quick to ask further questions in tandem with Jura's points. Second, compared to the other Shinju, Mamushi's decision to choose Eida as his target was noticeably the most reactive to an external stimuli rather than an introspective consideration for his emotions. He specifically reacted to Eida watching them with her Senrigan, then walked right up to her face and declared that she would be his target in a very antagonistic manner. Now, it's unclear whether this was the only time this situation ever happened, or if it happened again off screen, but we do know that Eida was very creeped out by this based on chapters 5 and 17, and she's never presented any new information that indicates that she's watched any other conversations between the Shinju after chapter 5, so I'm inclined to believe Eida was just too creeped out to try spying on them again. And if that's the case, pairing this with the fact that Mamushi hasn't gone after his target like Jura and Hidari, gone after Boruto or his accomplice like Matsuri and Ryu, tried to acquire knowledge like Jura, tried to understand humanity like Jura, or even tried to understand himself like Hidari, this demonstrates that Mamushi has been the most reactive and least proactive among the Shinju. Third, despite not fully understanding it, Mamushi has shown enjoyment in watching Code suffer, where we know that Bug wasn't exactly the biggest fan of Code after dragging him into all this mess. Coinciding with this, despite the love charm artificially creating romantic feelings towards Eida, we know that Bug actually hates Eida based on his internal thoughts in various chapters, being freaked out about their human trafficking conversation and calling them crazy pieces of work in chapter 57, calling Eida a witch in chapter 59, calling her and Code crazy freaks in that same chapter, saying he hates Damon in chapter 60, hoping Code and Damon would take each other out when they fought in chapter 71, and constantly hoping they would just leave in every chapter in between. Needless to say, Bug isn't exactly best buds with Amado's cyborgs. Rather, he is spiteful. Pooling this information together, I believe that Mamushi's true purpose behind targeting Eida stems from one of the following two ideas: an instinctual duty to eliminate threats as he perceives them, or a subconscious desire for vengeance, or perhaps a combination of the two. Re-examining my 3 bullet points on Bug and Mamushi, the first point demonstrates Mamushi's tendency to follow his instincts as a Ten-Tails and to ignore the human elements inside him. The second point demonstrates his tendency to react to external threats as he perceives them, and the third point demonstrates Bug's feelings towards Code, Eida, and Damon, and how they've translated over to Mamushi. These observations illustrate Mamushi's propensity towards duty and or vengeance. Another possibility worth mentioning is that Mamushi's motivations could be more akin to lust, especially given how creeped out Eida was over Mamushi watching her spy on them. However, I feel that the other two options more closely align with the majority of the information that's been presented so far. Moreover, while it's not presented in a creepy, lustful light, Matsuri's desire for Konohamaru does already lean in that direction because of her romantic desire, so this would sort of rehash the same idea again, whereas the instinctual duty or vengeance routes would be entirely unique to Mamushi. And given that each Shinju is seemingly taking a different thematic angle, I believe the other two options are more likely. Now, some of you may feel I'm being rather dismissive towards the idea of Bug's manufactured feelings for Eida being the leading cause of Mamushi's choice of target, and while I understand this perspective, I believe there's enough evidence to suggest otherwise. First, while one would utilize authentic feelings while the other would use inauthentic feelings, Matsuri's desire for Konohamaru would lean in a very similar direction as Mamushi's for Eida if this is the case, thus significantly diminishing Mamushi's uniqueness. Second, while the charm still lingers, it doesn't really have much of an effect when you're not around Eida or concerned with her in any way. Bug hasn't been shown thinking about Eida a single time after Code dragged him away in Chapter 71, and he had no problem leaving her locked up in that case for several years, and even vehemently opposed the idea of letting her out when Code asked him to. So it's not like Bug's thinking about Eida 24/7. It's pretty much only when he's in her presence that he succumbs to her charm in any noticeable way. And even then, he's one of the more subtle captives who at first glance don't seem all that captivated by Eida. Code literally questions Bugs about this in Chapter 57. And third, Bug's not even the only tree person who was under Eida's charm. Sasuke also met Eida before becoming a tree, meaning he became her captive, and there's a good chance that Moegi may have also met Eida at some point over the time skip. So given that Bug was one of the more subtle captives like Sasuke and Shikamaru, and neither Hidari nor Matsuri have had any inclination towards Eida whatsoever, it feels a little cheap to make Mamushi target Eida because of the love charm, but not do so for the other captives. The argument against these second and third points would be that unlike Sasuke and Moegi, Bug doesn't really have a close bond or strong feelings towards anyone alive, so Mamushi naturally defaults to Eida who force manufactured feelings onto Bug, whereas Hidari and Matsuri override this because of their stronger feelings towards their respective targets. However, I would argue that Bug has a closer bond to Code than Eida, and both likes and hates Code more than Eida, as he's literally more familiar with Code in general, has spent more time with Code lately than Eida, and seems to have a more positive attitude towards Code in comparison to Eida, but also is more frustrated with Code for ultimately being the one who dragged him into this whole mess to begin with. So realistically, whether the remaining feelings are positive or negative, I think Code would be a much more meaningful target for Mamushi than Eida if these types of feelings were the underlying cause of his choice of target. This actually supports my hypothesis that Mamushi is simply reacting to the external threat that he senses from Eida, as she was the first non-Otsutsuki to pose a possible threat to the Shinju, and she's also the closest thing to being an Otsutsuki without actually being one. With that in mind, while I did mention earlier that Matsuri devouring Konohamaru could be what finally motivates Mamushi to go after Eida, it's arguably even more likely that Eida spying on the Shinju again under Koji's suggestion or her own curiosity could be what motivates Mamushi to finally make his move, as that is the very thing that led Mamushi to target Eida in the first place. And finally, the only Shinju left to talk about is Ryu, who admittedly we know almost nothing about when it comes to his target. However, let's consider what little we do know. First, it's clear that Ryu feels an intense desire to eliminate anyone he finds suspicious or a threat, and like Mamushi, he doesn't seem overly motivated to go after his incapacitated target, and instead is merely following Jura and Matsuri's orders to find and eliminate Boruto, even though Ryu himself doesn't really understand it. Second, unlike Mamushi, Ryu was able to instantly choose Gaara as his target without any external stimuli like Mamushi and Eida, or long introspective thought like Jura, Hidari, or Matsuri. He just instantly knew. And unlike Eida, Gaara is not a threat to the Shinju at all. Not only was he easily defeated by Matsuri from the looks of it, he's unconscious and sealed in a jar of sand. What's he gonna do? Snore the Shinju to death? And third, Shinki has a very strong devotion towards his father and seeks to protect him and make him proud. The first point demonstrates Ryu's tendency to react to external threats as he perceives them, pointing him in the direction of a strong sense of duty, which is very closely aligned with Shinki's mindset as a shinobi. However, the second point emphasizes that Gaara is neither a threat nor did Ryu need to react to anything external to choose his target, but instead easily found the answer internally. Because of that, while Ryu's desire to slaughter may be linked to an instinctual duty to eliminate perceived threats, or possibly a trait stemming from Shinki, his desire to devour Gaara seems to originate elsewhere. And the third point illustrates some of Shinki's character traits, which haven't really translated over to Ryu very much from what we've seen. As a result, it's difficult to pinpoint Ryu's true reason to devour. Obviously, Shinki's love for Gaara as his father led to Ryu's inclination towards Gaara, but why does Ryu uniquely want to devour Gaara in a way that's meaningful to him? We simply don't have that answer yet. And frankly, now that he's been defeated, it's possible we may never get that answer. To summarize much of what we discussed so far, as a result of their different experiences and traits inherited from a diverse group of people, each Shinju has developed their humanity in a unique way and found their own distinct motivation to devour their target, one that embarks them on a different character journey while simultaneously embarking on the same physical path. For Jura, he seeks to evolve and overcome humanity's greatest flaw. For Hidari, he seeks to find his identity. For Matsuri, she finds herself in the middle of a clash between an emotional desire to be with Konohamaru and an instinctual desire to eliminate Konohamaru, and as these two opposing desires mix with one another, she feels compelled to devour him. For Mamushi, he seems compelled by an instinctual duty to eliminate threats as he perceives them, and or a subconscious desire for vengeance, and as for Ryu, we simply don't know yet. That being said, to play devil's advocate, I do think it's worth noting some potential inconsistencies or causes for concern that could put a damper on some of this analysis, depending on what is or isn't actually intentional. So brace yourself for a 3-minute segment of Jura Makes No Sense. In Chapter 19, Jura clearly states that he believes life forms should obey their instincts to strive towards the goal known as evolution. Yet, because of their social nature, humans bind themselves with restraints called reasoning, dulling that instinct, which is a side effect of acquiring intelligence, and is why humankind carries a fatal flaw, unlike us divine trees who stay true to our instincts. However, one of the very first things Jura says in his introduction in Chapter 4 is that overflowing curiosity and thirst for knowledge are surpassing their instinctual desire to devour Boruto. He quite literally started the series by stating that he, a divine tree, is surpassing his instincts. Did he just forget that? Did Ikimoto forget? It's one thing to have a character's actions contradict their words, but it's another thing to have a character's words randomly contradict their own words for no reason at all. Why is he even saying this now? What made him change his mind? He's only proven to himself that he was correct in Chapter 4 and the Shinju can surpass their instincts. Moreover, Jura says that it's because of their social nature that humans dulled their instincts with reasoning. You know who else is pretty social? That's right, the Shinju. They're literally having a social gathering in this very scene. All this dude has done is talk about Team 10. So why does Jura fear that love could pose problems for the Shinju based on his observations with Team 10, where their love for Himawari caused them to surpass their survival instincts, but not think that human reasoning is a concern as well? That doesn't make any sense. That's inverse logic. He should either think that the Shinju are immune to both the reasoning and love concerns, or he should fear that the Shinju are in danger of both the reasoning and love concerns. Not one or the other. And I don't know about you, but I think curiosity and thirst for knowledge is falling under the human reasoning category, not the love one. And Jura's really not helping his case when he says the most ridiculously wrong thing ever by saying that Inojin ended up needlessly losing his life after literally watching Himawari completely heal the giant hole in his stomach only to go on to praise her healing abilities for being on the level of the Shinju who are able to completely regenerate their entire bodies, as we saw with Hidari. Not to mention that Jura literally watched the emotional Himawari in Team 10 remain completely calm about Inojin's injuries after Himawari healed him, strongly indicating that Inojin is not dead. So I don't know why Jura even said this. Why didn't he just say, Inojin ended up needlessly hurting himself, or Inojin ended up needlessly almost losing his life? He should know better. Hell, Matsuri's trees can figure it out for him. So as much as it pains me to say this, how much of Jura's dialogue can we even trust? When is Jura pushing the narrative with his words, and when is he just saying random shit? Personally, I think the story is painting Jura in a hypocritical light, an intentional contradiction meant to facilitate the story's themes. However, some of the dialogue inconsistencies muddy the waters a bit. Maybe some of it is just lost in translation. After all, it wouldn't be the first mistake Viz made since Two Blue Vortex started. Anyway though, I hope you enjoyed my yap session about the Shinju, so let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications for future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.